In the silent heat of the afternoon, a white horse bursts through the trees of a dense forest, galloping straight to the edge of a murky lake. In the water, a girl vanishes amid whirlpools and foam, without a single scream. The horse charges forward, partially dives, and grabs the girl by the collar with its teeth. Around them, alligators break the surface one by one, but keep their distance. With the girl in its jaws, the horse returns to shore and lays her on the soaked mud. Then, without moving, it turns to face the lake and stays that way. There, the silence spoke louder than any scream. Love stories with animals? Then hit subscribe so you don't miss a single one. Thanks for being here. Now, back to the story. The first rays of dawn painted the Appalachian hills in hues of amber and gold as Emma Walsh sat on the rotting wooden porch steps of her grandmother's cabin. At 12 years old, she already carried the weight of too many sorrows on her narrow shoulders. Her fingers traced the frayed edges of her faded blue dress, one of the few possessions she'd managed to bring when child services had deposited her here 3 months ago after her mother's departure. That's what Grandma Ruth called it anyway. Never death, never gone, just departed, as if her mother had simply stepped out for groceries and might return any day now. Emma knew better. A cool mountain breeze carried the scent of pine and something else, something dark and earthy that emanated from Silver Lake. The lake lay half a mile beyond the cabin, nestled in a depression between rolling hills that the locals called the Hollow. Most of the residents of Willow Creek, West Virginia, avoided it, especially after sundown. "Cursed waters," Grandma Ruth would mutter whenever Emma mentioned it. "That lake's taken more than its share of souls." But this morning, with Grandma still asleep, lost in the fog of medication that never quite eased her arthritis but dulled her awareness of Emma's existence, the lake called to her with an irresistible pull. Emma slipped off the porch and into the dewy grass, her worn sneakers quickly becoming soaked as she navigated through the overgrown path that led away from the cabin. The dirt trail narrowed as it descended into the valley, bordered by wild blackberry bushes and tall grass that hadn't been cut in years. She pushed deeper into the woods, feeling a strange sense of freedom with each step that carried her away from the cabin's suffocating silence. Willow Creek was the kind of town that existed in the shadows of progress, a collection of weather-beaten buildings, a single general store, a post office that doubled as the town hall, and a white-clapboard church that had seen better days. Most families had lived there for generations, working the same land, telling the same stories, perpetuating the same fears. Emma, as an outsider, felt their curious stares whenever Grandma Ruth managed to take her into town for supplies. "That's the Walsh girl," they'd whisper. "Poor thing. Mother ran off with some trucker, they say. Left her with old Ruth, who can barely take care of herself." The rumors weren't entirely accurate, but Emma had learned that correcting adults only made them more determined to believe their versions of the truth. As she emerged from the tree line, Silver Lake spread before her like a mirror, reflecting the morning sky. Despite its ominous reputation, it was undeniably beautiful. A perfect oval of water surrounded by dense forest, its surface disturbed only by the occasional leap of a fish or the gentle landing of a water bird. Mist hovered above the water, creating an ethereal boundary between the lake and the world beyond. Emma approached the water's edge, drawn by the tranquility that seemed at odds with the lake's fearsome reputation. She knelt on a flat rock at the shore, peering into the clear shallows where tiny minnows darted between submerged stones. The water was so clear she could see several feet down before the depths turned a mysterious blue-black that concealed whatever lay at the bottom. "What are you hiding?" she whispered to the lake, her words dissolving into the mist. A twig snapped behind her. Emma whirled around, her heart hammering against her ribs. At the edge of the clearing stood a horse unlike any she'd ever seen. Its coat was pure white, almost luminescent in the morning light, its mane and tail flowing like silver streams in the gentle breeze. The animal stood perfectly still, dark eyes fixed on Emma with an intelligence that seemed almost human. For a long moment, neither moved. Emma barely breathed, afraid to break the spell of this unexpected encounter. The horse's ears flicked forward, then back, assessing her. Then with deliberate slowness, it lowered its head and took a step toward her. "Hey there," Emma whispered, extending her hand palm up the way she'd seen people do in movies. "Where did you come from?" The horse took another step, then another, moving with a grace that belied its size. When it was just a few feet away, it stopped and regarded her with those knowing eyes. "You're not afraid of the lake," Emma observed, a small smile tugging at her lips. "That makes two of us." The horse snorted softly, as if in agreement, then lowered its head to graze on the sweet grass that grew near the water's edge. Emma watched, transfixed by the animal's beauty and the strange sense of companionship that had settled between them. "I should call you something," she mused. "How about Ghost?" The horse's head lifted at the sound, ears pricked forward. "Ghost it is," Emma decided, feeling the first genuine joy she'd experienced since arriving in Willow Creek. Over the next few weeks, Emma's visits to Silver Lake became a daily ritual. She would slip away while Grandma Ruth napped, sometimes bringing an apple or carrot from the kitchen for Ghost, who seemed to anticipate her arrival, appearing from the woods moments after she reached the shore. The horse never allowed her to touch him, maintaining a respectful distance, but his presence was constant, watchful. During these visits, Emma would talk to Ghost about everything: her mother's absence, the father she'd never known, the loneliness that permeated her days at Grandma Ruth's cabin, and her struggles at Willow Creek Elementary School, where she remained an outsider despite nearly 4 months of attendance. "They all know each other," she confided one afternoon as she sat cross-legged on the flat rock watching Ghost drink from the lake. "They've been friends since kindergarten. They have inside jokes and secret handshakes, and I'm just the girl whose mom left." Ghost lifted his head, water dripping from his muzzle, and regarded her with those unfathomable eyes. "Miss Parker, she's my teacher. She tries to include me," Emma continued. "She put me in a group with Zoe and Tyler for the history project, but they just talk around me like I'm invisible." She picked up a small stone and skipped it across the water's surface. "I wish I was invisible sometimes. Then at least I'd have a superpower instead of just being ignored." Ghost whinnied softly and moved closer to her than he ever had before, his breath warm against her hair. For a moment, Emma thought he might allow her to touch him, but he maintained that final barrier of space between them. "It's okay," she said. "I understand about needing space. Grandma Ruth is the same way." The relationship between Emma and her grandmother remained strained. Ruth Walsh was a woman hollowed out by grief, first for her husband, then for her son, and finally for the daughter-in-law who had succumbed to despair after years of struggling with addiction. Now, burdened with the care of a granddaughter she barely knew, Ruth moved through her days like a ghost herself, speaking little, eating less, and retreating into the sanctuary of her medications whenever the pain, physical or emotional, became too much to bear. On the rare occasions when Ruth seemed lucid, she would fix Emma with a gaze that seemed to look through her rather than at her. "You have his eyes," Ruth would say. "My Jack's eyes, too curious for their own good." Then she would shake her head. "Stay away from that lake, girl. It's not natural the way it draws people in. It's taken enough from this family." But Emma couldn't stay away. Silver Lake, with Its mysterious depths and the white horse that guarded its shores had become her sanctuary. There she could escape the suffocating silence of the cabin, the pitying glances of the townspeople, and the crushing weight of being unwanted. One crisp October afternoon, as clouds gathered on the horizon promising the first real cold snap of the season, Emma arrived at the lake to find Ghost already waiting. The horse seemed agitated, pacing along the shoreline, occasionally stopping to stare intently at something in the water that Emma couldn't see. "What's wrong, boy?" she asked, approaching cautiously. Ghost whinnied, a sharp sound that echoed across the water, then turned to look at her with an urgency she'd never seen before. He pawed at the ground, then moved to the water's edge, looking back at her expectantly. Curious, Emma joined him at the shore, peering into the clear shallows. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just stones, aquatic plants, and the occasional dart of a small fish. But as she leaned closer, the sunlight caught something beneath the surface, something that glinted with an unnatural brightness. "What is that?" she murmured, kneeling on the rock for a better look. The object lay about 3 feet from shore, partially buried in the sandy bottom, but unmistakably metallic. Its shape was difficult to discern through the gentle ripple of the water, but it appeared to be round, perhaps the size of a dinner plate. Without thinking, Emma slipped off her sneakers and rolled up the legs of her jeans. The October air was chilly, but curiosity overrode her discomfort as she stepped into the water. The cold sent shocks up her legs, making her gasp, but she pressed forward, the soft lake bottom squishing between her toes. Ghost whinnied again, more urgently this time, but Emma was focused on her discovery. One step, then another, the water now reaching her knees, soaking the rolled cuffs of her jeans. She stretched out her hand, fingers just inches from the mysterious object. "Almost got it," she whispered. Suddenly, the lake bottom seemed to shift beneath her feet. What she had taken for solid ground gave way, and Emma found herself slipping into deeper water. She tried to regain her footing, but the sandy bottom had become a steep drop-off. In seconds, the water was at her chest, then her chin. Emma had never learned to swim. Panic seized Emma as the cold water closed over her head. Her lungs burned, her limbs flailed uselessly against the unexpected depth and the bright autumn. Sky above shimmered and distorted through the water's surface. In that moment of terror, a strange calm descended upon her. A detached awareness that perhaps this was why the townspeople feared Silver Lake. Perhaps this was how it had taken others before her. Time seemed to slow as she sank deeper, the metallic object now forgotten. The muffled silence of the underwater world enveloped her, peaceful in its way, as darkness began to creep into the edges of her vision. Emma's struggles weakened, her body growing heavy and her thoughts sluggish. Then, through the watery haze, a brilliant white form plunged into the lake. Strong currents buffeted her as powerful hooves churned the water. Before Emma could comprehend what was happening, she felt the firm tug of teeth grasping the collar of her jacket. With a powerful surge, Ghost pulled her toward the surface. Emma's head broke through into air, and she gasped desperately, coughing and sputtering as water streamed from her nose and mouth. Ghost maintained his grip on her jacket, swimming with powerful strokes toward the shore, dragging her alongside him. Emma's body felt leaden, her soaked clothes weighing her down, but the horse's strength was unwavering. When they reached the shallows, Ghost released her collar and nudged her with his muzzle, urging her to stand. Emma's legs trembled beneath her as she staggered onto the rocky shore, collapsing onto hands and knees, still coughing up lake water. Her wet clothes clung to her shivering body, and her hair hung in dripping tendrils around her face. You saved me," she rasped, looking up at the magnificent animal that stood beside her, water streaming from his white coat. Ghost shook himself, sending a spray of droplets in all directions, then lowered his head to nuzzle Emma's shoulder, the first direct contact he had initiated. The warmth of his breath against her cold skin sent a shiver of a different kind through her. "Thank you," she whispered, tentatively raising a hand to touch his muzzle. To her surprise, Ghost allowed the contact, standing perfectly still as her trembling fingers traced the soft velvet of his nose. A connection was sealed in that moment, forged in the crucible of near tragedy and rescue. Emma felt it like a physical bond between them, as tangible as the breath that still rasped painfully in her lungs. The sound of voices penetrated her daze. People were shouting, their calls echoing around the lake basin. Ghost's ears pricked forward, and he took a step back from Emma, his posture alert but not frightened. "Emma! Emma Walsh!" The voices grew closer, accompanied by the crackle of footsteps on the forest floor. Through the trees came three figures: Sheriff Daniel Hayes, his deputy Jackson Cooper, and to Emma's surprise, her teacher Miss Parker. Their expressions shifted from concern to shock as they took in the scene. The soaking wet girl and the magnificent white horse standing guard beside her. "Good Lord," breathed the sheriff, his hand instinctively moving to the holster at his hip. "Don't," Emma cried, throwing herself in front of Ghost. "He saved me. I fell in the lake and he pulled me out." Miss Parker rushed forward, shrugging off her cardigan and wrapping it around Emma's shivering shoulders. "You're freezing, honey. What happened? We've been looking everywhere for you. Your grandmother woke up and found you gone." Emma glanced up in surprise. Grandma Ruth had noticed her absence, had actually cared enough to report it. I come here sometimes," Emma admitted, teeth chattering. "To the lake. I was looking at something in the water and I slipped. I can't swim." She turned to look at Ghost, who had retreated several paces, but remained watchful. "He jumped in and pulled me out by my jacket." Sheriff Hayes approached cautiously, his weathered face creased with concern. "That's a wild horse, Emma. Been spotted around these parts for years, but no one's ever gotten close to him." He studied Ghost with a mixture of wariness and respect. Never known one to save a drowning child before. "His name is Ghost," Emma said, drawing the cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "He's my friend." The adults exchanged glances that Emma couldn't interpret, some complex communication passing between them that excluded her, as adult conversations so often did. "Let's get you home and into some dry clothes," Miss Parker said gently. "Then maybe you can tell us more about your friend." As they led Emma away, she looked back at Ghost, who remained at the lake's edge, his white form stark against the dark water and autumn foliage. For a moment, she thought he might follow, but he stayed, vigilant and still, watching until she disappeared into the trees. By nightfall, word of Emma's rescue had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. The story grew with each retelling. The Walsh girl had been dragged into the depths by the lake spirits. The mysterious white horse had walked on water to reach her. The horse was the spirit of Emma's departed mother, watching over her child. In a town starved for excitement, the incident became instant folklore. Emma sat wrapped in a quilt by the wood stove in Grandma Ruth's cabin, a mug of hot chocolate cooling between her hands, as she endured the stern lecture being delivered by Mrs. Winters from Child Protective Services. The woman had arrived within hours of Emma's return home, clipboard in hand and disapproval etched into every line of her face. "This is precisely the kind of neglect we were concerned about when placing Emma in your care, Mrs. Walsh," Mrs. Winters was saying, her voice carrying the practiced patience of someone who had delivered similar speeches many times before. A 12-year-old child should not be wandering unsupervised near a body of water known to be dangerous. Grandma Ruth sat rigidly in her rocking chair, her arthritic hands clenched in her lap. For once, her eyes were clear, the medication haze absent as she faced down the social worker. "I fell asleep," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "The pain was bad today and She stopped, seeming to realize the inadequacy of her excuse. "It won't happen again." "I'm afraid I've heard that before," Mrs. Winters replied, making a note on her clipboard. "Given the seriousness of today's incident and the pattern of inadequate supervision, I'll be recommending Emma's placement in a foster home in Charleston. There's a couple there who have expressed interest." "No!" Emma blurted out, spilling hot chocolate on the quilt as she sat up straight. "I don't want to go to Charleston. I want to stay here." Mrs. Winters gave her a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand this is upsetting, Emma, but we have to consider what's best for you. Your grandmother's health issues make it difficult for her to provide proper care, and today's incident could have ended very differently if not for the unusual intervention of a wild animal." "Ghost isn't just an animal," Emma protested. "He's special, and I don't need someone watching me every second. I'm 12, not 5. Nevertheless, I'll help," came a new voice from the doorway. They all turned to see Miss Parker standing there, a canvas bag of groceries in her arms. Sheriff Hayes had let her in, and he now stood behind her, hat in hands. "Jessica," Mrs. Winters acknowledged with a nod, "this is a private discussion regarding a child welfare matter." "I'm aware," Miss Parker replied, setting the groceries on the kitchen counter. "And as Emma's teacher, I have a professional interest in her welfare." She moved into the living room, standing beside Emma's chair. "I'd like to propose an alternative to removing Emma from her home and school." Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I live just 3 houses down from the church," Miss Parker explained. "I can come by in the mornings to help Emma get ready for school, and she can come to my house after school until Mrs. Walsh is able to pick her up. On weekends, Emma can join the youth group activities I coordinate at the church." She placed her gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "That way, Emma gets the supervision she needs while maintaining stability in her home and school life." Sheriff Hayes cleared his throat. "And I've already spoken with Dr. Hamilton about adjusting Mrs. Walsh's medication schedule. Less sedation, better pain management. He's coming by tomorrow morning." Grandma Ruth looked up sharply. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, Ruth," the sheriff said quietly. "It's community, the way things used to be done around here before we all got so isolated in our own troubles." Mrs. Winters tapped her pen against her clipboard, clearly weighing the proposal. "This is highly irregular," she said finally, "but given the limited placement options in the county and Emma's evident attachment to the area," she fixed Miss Parker with a stern look, "I would need weekly reports, and any further incidents would result in immediate removal." "Understood, Miss Parker." "Agreed. And you, young lady," Mrs. Winters turned to Emma, "are to stay away from that lake unless accompanied by a responsible adult. Is that clear?" Emma nodded, though inwardly she made no such promise. Ghost was at that lake, and after today, their bond was stronger than ever. No adult's rules would keep her from him. After Mrs. Winters departed with a final warning and the promise of an unannounced visit the following week, the tension in the cabin eased somewhat. Sheriff Hayes helped Miss Parker unpack the groceries. She'd brought enough food to last several days, Emma noted with surprise. "The church ladies are organizing a meal rotation," Miss Parker explained when she caught Emma watching. "Different families will drop off dinners a few times a week. Mrs. Collins from the diner is coordinating it." Emma blinked in confusion. "Why would they do that? Nobody here even knows us." Miss Parker smiled gently. "They know enough. And in Willow Creek, that's all that matters." She hesitated, then added, "Your story, what happened with Ghost at the lake, it's touched people, made them remember something important about this place, about who we used to be to each other." Later, as Emma lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of activity in the kitchen, Miss Parker showing Grandma Ruth how to use the new pill organizer, the sheriff's deep voice offering to fix the loose porch step. She stared out her window at the sliver of Silver Lake visible in the distance, a gleam of moonlight on dark water. Somewhere out there, Ghost was watching over that mysterious lake. Emma closed her eyes and made a silent promise to return to him, no matter what. The adults decided, in a life that had offered little constancy, the white horse had become her one true certainty. The next morning, true to her word, Miss Parker arrived just after dawn to help with breakfast and Emma's preparations for school. To Emma's astonishment, Grandma Ruth was already awake, dressed in something other than her usual bathrobe, her thin grey hair combed neatly. "Made some oatmeal," Ruth said gruffly when she saw Emma's surprise. "Sit and eat before it gets cold." The oatmeal was lumpy and slightly burned, but Emma ate without complaint, watching this unfamiliar version of her grandmother move about the kitchen with stiff but purposeful movements. "Sheriff Hayes is coming by at 4 to fix that loose step," Ruth said, not quite meeting Emma's eyes. "Said you could help if you wanted. Learn something useful." Emma nodded, uncertain how to navigate this new territory. "I'd like that." The walk to school with Miss Parker was filled with questions about Ghost, how long Emma had known him, whether she'd seen him before yesterday, if he'd allowed her to touch him before. Emma answered cautiously, protective of the private relationship she'd developed with the horse over the past months. "Animals can sense things in people that we sometimes miss," Miss Parker said thoughtfully as they approached the school building. "Especially children. There's a purity in how you connect with the world that adults often lose." "Is that why Ghost saved me? Because I'm a kid?" Miss Parker considered this. "Perhaps, or perhaps he saw something special in you specifically, Emma, something worth protecting." The idea that she might be special, that someone, even a horse, might see value in her, was so foreign that Emma didn't know how to respond. She'd spent so long being the forgotten child, the unwanted burden, that the concept of being worthy of protection felt almost dangerous to contemplate. School that day was markedly different from any day before. Word of Emma's rescue had transformed her status from invisible outsider to the center of fascination. Classmates who had previously ignored her existence now crowded around her desk, peppering her with questions about the white horse and the lake. "Is it true he can talk?" asked Tyler Matthews, one of the boys who had excluded her from their history project discussions. "Don't be stupid," Emma replied. "He's a horse. Horses don't talk." "My grandpa says that lake is haunted," volunteered Zoe Miller, twirling a strand of blonde hair around her finger. "Says there used to be a whole town under there before they flooded the valley in the 1950s to make the reservoir." Emma frowned. "It's not a reservoir, it's a natural lake." "Nuh-uh," Zoe insisted. "It's man-made. Everyone knows that." Before Emma could argue further, Miss Parker called the class to order, directing their attention to the day's math lesson. But throughout the morning, Emma couldn't shake Zoe's words. Could Silver Lake really be man-made? Had there once been a town beneath those mysterious waters? And if so, what was the significance of the metallic object she'd glimpsed just before falling in? The object that Ghost had seemed so intent on showing her. The old newspaper archives in Willow Creek's tiny library were housed in a back room that smelled of dust and forgotten stories. Emma had never had reason to visit this section before, but on Saturday morning, with Miss Parker occupied in a teachers' meeting, she slipped away from the youth group activities at the church and made her way to the library instead. Mrs. Holloway, the elderly librarian, peered at Emma over her spectacles with surprise. "Well now, don't often see young folks interested in the archives. What can I help you find, dear?" I need information about Silver Lake, Emma said, about its history. Someone told me it might be man-made. Mrs. Holloway's expression shifted, a shadow of something, caution, concern, passing across her lined face. Silver Lake, is it? She closed the book she'd been cataloguing and stood slowly. I suppose you would be curious after what happened. Follow me. She led Emma through the stacks to a door marked Local, History Collection, and unlocked it with a key from the chain around her neck. Inside, metal filing cabinets lined the walls, and a single table with a microfiche reader occupied the center of the room. Everything we have about the county's history is in here, Mrs. Holloway explained, moving to one of the cabinets. The Silver Lake materials would be in this section. She pulled open a drawer and began rifling through folders labeled by year. Here we are, 1952 to 1956, the flooding and relocation. She placed a thick folder on the table and opened it to reveal yellowed newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and what appeared to be copies of official documents. I'll leave you to it, Mrs. Holloway said. Just don't remove anything from this room and let me know when you're finished so I can lock up again. Alone with the archives, Emma began to piece together a history that no one had thought to share with her. Silver Lake, as Zoe had correctly stated, was indeed man-made. The newspaper clippings told the story. In 1952, the state had approved a hydroelectric dam project on the Blackwater River. The resulting reservoir would flood a small mining settlement called Silverton that had fallen on hard times after the coal seam ran dry. This is the tale. Black and white photograph showed a collection of simple wooden buildings, a company store, a one-room schoolhouse, a church, and rows of identical miners' cottages. In the background, barely visible, was a larger structure that the caption identified as Silverton Lodge, former mining company headquarters. Most residents had been compensated and relocated, but not all had gone willingly. Emma's breath caught as she read a headline from 1954. Final holdouts removed from Silverton. As waters rise. The accompanying photograph showed an elderly couple being escorted from their home by police officers. The woman's face contorted in anguish as she reached back toward the house she was being forced to abandon. Another clipping, dated a week later, reported tragedy at Silverton Dam, engineer's daughter lost in rising waters. The article described how 12-year-old Lillian Hayes, daughter of project engineer Thomas Hayes, had wandered onto the construction site and was believed to have fallen into the rapidly filling reservoir. Despite extensive searching, her body was never recovered. Emma's fingers trembled as she traced the girl's name. Hayes, the same surname as Sheriff Daniel Hayes. Could there be a connection? And the age, 12, just like Emma herself. The coincidence felt significant, though she couldn't yet understand why. As she continued through the folder, Emma found more recent clippings describing strange occurrences at the lake over the decades. Unexplained lights beneath the surface, unusual behavior in local wildlife, fishermen reporting massive shapes moving in the depths. Most were written with a skeptical tone, attributing the phenomena to overactive imaginations or local superstition, but the frequency of such reports suggested something more than mere folklore. At the very back of the folder was a faded color, photograph from what appeared to be the 1970s, showing a white horse standing at the edge of Silver Lake, its posture alert and watchful. The caption read simply, "The Guardian? Local legend claims white horse appears before lake incidents." Emma's heart raced. Ghost had been watching over Silver Lake for decades, long before she was born, perhaps even before her mother was born. But why? What was he guarding, and why had he chosen to reveal himself to her? The metallic object she'd glimpsed in the water before falling in. Could it be connected to the submerged town, to the mystery of the engineer's lost daughter, to Ghost himself? Emma carefully returned the materials to their folder, her mind swirling with questions. One thing was certain: she needed to return to Silver Lake, and soon. But this time, she wouldn't go alone. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That afternoon, after Sheriff Hayes drove her home from the library, Emma found Grandma Ruth in an unusually talkative mood. The adjustment to her medication seemed to be working. She was more alert, less foggy, though the lines of pain around her eyes remained deeply etched. "Sheriff says you were looking up the history of Silver Lake," Ruth remarked as she chopped vegetables for a stew, her gnarled fingers working slowly but deliberately. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded, setting the table as Miss Parker had shown her. "Did you know it used to be a town, before they flooded it for the dam?" Ruth's knife paused in its rhythm. "I knew." She resumed chopping, her strokes a little more forceful. "My husband, your grandfather, his family was from Silverton. They were among those who had to relocate." She glanced at Emma. "That's how we ended up with this land, part of the compensation package." Emma stared at her grandmother, connecting dots she hadn't realized existed. "So our family has a connection to the lake." "More than you know," Ruth murmured, so softly that Emma wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. Before she could ask what Ruth meant, there was a knock at the door. Miss Parker entered, accompanied by her fiancé, David Miller, who taught science at the middle school. Emma had met him briefly at church functions, but had never spoken to him directly. "Hope we're not interrupting," Miss Parker said, setting a fresh loaf of bread on the counter. David heard about Emma's interest in Silver Lake and thought he might be able to help. David stepped forward, extending his hand first to Ruth, then to Emma. "I've been studying the lake's ecosystem for a few years now," he explained. "A part of an ongoing environmental assessment for the county. Miss Parker, Jessica, mentioned you had some questions about it." Emma's pulse quickened. Would you take me there? To see it properly, I mean, with someone who knows about it." The adults exchanged glances, that silent communication that Emma was beginning to recognize as adults, weighing a child's request against their own concerns. To her surprise, it was Grandma Ruth who spoke first. "You should go," she said, her voice firm. "Take her tomorrow, Sunday afternoon. I'll be at church with Jessica, but afterward..." She met David's eyes. "She needs to understand what that place is, what it means to our family." The next day dawned, clear and cool, a perfect October Sunday. Emma sat through the church service with uncharacteristic patience, her mind racing with anticipation. Pastor Williams delivered a sermon about faith and protection that seemed uncannily relevant to her situation, though she doubted he knew the details of her research or her planned expedition that afternoon. After the service, as promised, David Miller was waiting outside in his pickup truck, a backpack of equipment in the bed alongside what looked like scuba gear. Emma climbed in eagerly after saying goodbye to Miss Parker and Grandma Ruth, who would be attending the church potluck lunch. "Your grandmother said something interesting to me before we left," David remarked as they drove towards Silver Lake. "She said to tell you that some things lost can still be found if you know where to look. Does that mean anything to you?" Emma shook her head, though the words sent a shiver of anticipation through her. "She hardly ever talks to me, especially about the past." David nodded thoughtfully. "Trauma can do that to people, lock away parts of themselves that hurt too much to access. But sometimes, when they see someone else walking the same path, it creates an opening." They parked at a small clearing that Emma hadn't discovered in her solitary explorations, apparently an official access point to the lake, though rarely used. As they unloaded the equipment, Emma scanned the tree line for any sign of Ghost. "He might not come with others around," she said, unable to hide her disappointment when the white horse failed to appear. "The horse?" David asked, shouldering his backpack. "I've caught glimpses of him over the years during my research trips, never up close though. He seems to know when to make himself scarce." They followed a better-maintained trail than the one Emma usually took, emerging at a different section of shoreline where large flat rocks created a natural jetty extending into the clear water. "This is where the dam engineers took their measurements during construction," David explained, setting down his gear. "It's one of the deepest parts of the lake, directly over what used to be the center of Silverton." He unfolded a laminated map and spread it on a rock. "Here's the original town layout, overlaid with the current lake boundaries." His finger traced the submerged streets and buildings. "The church would have been right about there, the school here, and the company lodge. The biggest building in town would be beneath us now." Emma studied the map, trying to orient herself. "There's something in the water," she said, pointing to the spot where she'd fallen in. "Something metal that reflects the light. I was trying to reach it when I fell." David looked intrigued. "Show me." They walked along the shore to the spot Emma recognized. The water was calmer today, its surface like glass, providing perfect visibility into the depths. David knelt beside her, shading his eyes against the sun's reflection. "I see it," he said after a moment. "Good eye, Emma. That definitely doesn't look natural." He began unpacking his scuba gear methodically. "I'm going to take a closer look. I've been mapping the submerged structures for years, but this area has been difficult to access due to underwater currents. This might be an important find." As David prepared to dive, Emma continued scanning the shoreline for Ghost. A movement in the trees caught her eye, a flash of white among the autumn colors. Her heart leaped. "He's here," she whispered. David looked up from adjusting his mask. "The horse! Where?" Emma pointed, but the movement had ceased. "He's watching. He's always watching over the lake." David studied her thoughtfully. "You know, there's a scientific term for animals that occupy a key role in maintaining an ecosystem's balance. Keystone species. They have an impact far greater than their numbers would suggest." He tightened the straps on his buoyancy compensator. "But sometimes, a single individual animal can develop behaviors that seem to transcend normal instinct. Indigenous cultures often recognize such animals as spirit guides or protectors." "Is that what you think Ghost is?" Emma asked. "A protector?" David smiled. "I'm a scientist. I observe and record data before drawing conclusions. But I will say this. That horse saved your life when no human was around to help. That's a fact, not folklore." He checked his regulator. "I won't be down long, 15 minutes max. The underwater currents can be tricky, especially near the old structures." Emma watched as David waded into the water, performed a final equipment check, and disappeared beneath the surface with barely a ripple. Once alone, she called softly, "Ghost, it's okay, you can come out." For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, with deliberate grace, the white horse emerged from the tree line. He approached cautiously, stopping several yards away, his dark eyes fixed on the spot where David had submerged. "He's helping us," Emma explained, feeling oddly certain that Ghost understood. "He's looking at the shiny thing you showed me." Ghost whickered softly, then moved closer to Emma than he ever had before in the presence of others. His warm breath ruffled her hair as he stood beside her, both of them watching the still surface of the lake for signs of David's return. Minutes ticked by. Emma began to feel uneasy as David's promised 15 minutes stretched to 20. Ghost sensed her anxiety, growing restless, pawing at the ground and tossing his magnificent head. "Something's wrong," Emma whispered. As if in confirmation, a stream of bubbles erupted at the lake's surface, far more violent than normal exhalation. Then David broke through, gasping and flailing, his movements panicked and uncoordinated. "Help!" he managed to call before sinking again. Without hesitation, Ghost plunged into the lake, powerful legs propelling him through the water toward the struggling diver. Emma watched in horror as David surfaced again, fighting to stay afloat despite his equipment, clearly in distress. Ghost reached him just as he began to sink once more. The horse circled behind him, then ducked his head beneath David's arm, providing a floating support. With careful movements, Ghost began towing the semi-conscious man toward shore, navigating the same currents that had apparently overwhelmed the experienced diver. Emma waded into the shallows, heedless of her shoes and clothes, reaching out to help as they approached. Together, she and Ghost managed to drag David onto the rocky shore. He was conscious but dazed, a gash visible on his forehead where his mask had been torn away. "Current, stronger than charted," he gasped as Emma helped him remove his tank. "Got caught in submerged cables, but I found it." His hand fumbled at a mesh collection bag attached to his belt. "Take it!" Emma unzipped the bag and withdrew a metal object encrusted with decades of mineral deposits and aquatic growth. As she brushed away some of the accumulation, her fingers felt the unmistakable shape of a locket, a heart-shaped pendant on a tarnished silver chain. Ghost approached, his wet coat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, and nudged the locket with his muzzle. A clear, soft whicker escaped him, a sound so full of emotion that Emma felt tears spring to her eyes, though she didn't understand why. "What is it?" she asked David, who was sitting up now, holding a bandana to his bleeding forehead. "Don't know for sure," he admitted, "but it was lodged in the collapsed doorway of what used to be the company lodge. Must have been caught there when the waters rose." He looked at Ghost with newfound respect. "Your friend seems very interested in it." Ghost was indeed fixated on the locket, his intelligent eyes never leaving it as Emma turned it over in her hands, looking for a way to open it. The clasp was corroded shut, but as she applied gentle pressure, it suddenly gave way. Inside, protected from water damage by the tight seal, was a faded photograph of a young girl with a white horse, a horse identical in every way to Ghost, though the photo had clearly been taken decades ago. On the opposite side of the locket was an inscription: "Lillian Hayes and Spirit, together always, 1954. "Lillian Hayes," Emma breathed, "the engineer's daughter who was lost when the valley flooded." "The sheriff's aunt," David added, his voice soft with wonder. "His father's sister, the family tragedy no one talks about." Ghost made a low, mournful sound, pressing his muzzle against the locket. In that moment, understanding dawned on Emma with crystal clarity. "It's been you all along," she whispered to the horse, "or your ancestors, watching over her resting place, protecting it." She looked at David. "Ghost isn't just any horse. He's descended from Lillian's horse, the one she loved, the one who couldn't save her." David stared at the white horse, scientific, skepticism warring with the evidence before his eyes. "That's genetically improbable. Wild horses don't typically maintain bloodlines in such isolation for that many generations without diversification." "Maybe it's not about genetics," Emma suggested, her fingers closing around the locket. "Maybe it's about something else, something science can't measure." Ghost threw his head back and released a whinny that echoed across the lake, bouncing off the surrounding hills and returning as if in answer to itself. Then, with a final nudge to Emma's hand, he turned and galloped along the shoreline, his white form a blur against the dark water, until he disappeared into the forest once more. David struggled to his feet, still unsteady. "We should get back. Report this find. That locket, it belongs to the Hayes family. They've been searching for closure for generations." But Emma's fingers tightened around the pendant. "Not yet," she said, with a certainty that surprised even her. "Ghost showed this to me for a reason. I need to understand why before we tell anyone else." As they gathered David's equipment and prepared to leave, Emma cast one last look at Silver Lake, its surface now rippling with the afternoon breeze, sunlight dancing across the water that concealed an entire town, and the resting place of a girl not so different from herself, who had loved a white horse that still maintained its vigil after all these years. The locket felt warm in her hand, as if carrying not just the history of Lillian Hayes, but a message meant specifically for Emma Walsh, a message about loss, loyalty, and the enduring power of love that transcended even death. Emma sat on the porch swing, the locket cradled in her palm, as Sheriff Hayes's patrol car pulled into the dirt driveway. The autumn sun was setting earlier now, casting long shadows across Grandma Ruth's property and bathing everything in golden light. Inside the cabin, she could hear Miss Parker and David recounting the day's events to her grandmother, their voices a gentle murmur through the screen door. Sheriff Hayes approached slowly, his weathered face unreadable as he removed his hat and took a seat beside her on the swing. For a long moment, neither spoke, the only sound the creak of the chains as the swing moved gently back and forth. "David called me," the sheriff finally said, his deep voice soft. "Told me what you found." Emma nodded, still looking at the locket, rather than at him. "Lillian Hayes," she said. "She was your aunt." "My father's little sister, yes," he confirmed. "She was 12 years old when the valley was flooded, same age as you are now." He stared out at the distant shimmer of Silver Lake, visible through the trees. "My grandparents never recovered from her loss. My father rarely spoke of her. The pain was too great, but he made sure I knew about Silver Lake, made sure I understood what it had taken from our family." Emma finally looked up at him. "But you became sheriff here anyway. You stayed, even with those memories." A sad smile touched his lips. Someone had to remember. Someone had to watch over things. His gaze shifted to the locket in her palm. "May I?" Hesitantly, Emma handed it to him. The sheriff opened it carefully, his breath catching as he saw the photograph inside. One rough finger traced the image of the smiling girl and the white horse beside her. "Spirit," he murmured. "That was her horse's name. My father told me that when the waters started rising, they couldn't find Lillian anywhere. Later, witnesses reported seeing a white horse running along the edge of the flood, whinnying and distressed." He closed the locket gently. "They searched for weeks, never found her body, though they recovered her jacket caught on a submerged tree. Eventually, they had to declare her gone." "But the white horse stayed," Emma said. Spirit's descendants. They've been watching over the lake ever since, watching over her." Sheriff Hayes nodded slowly. "There have always been stories about a white horse near Silver Lake. Most folks thought it was just local legend, but my father believed. Said as long as that horse remained, Lillian wasn't truly gone." He handed the locket back to Emma. "What I don't understand is why the horse showed it to you. Why now, after all these years?" Before Emma could respond, the screen door opened, and Grandma Ruth stepped onto the porch, leaning heavily on her walking stick. Her face, usually drawn with pain and disconnection, now held a clarity and purpose that Emma had never seen before. "It's time you knew, Daniel," Ruth said to the sheriff. "Time both of you knew." She lowered herself carefully into the rocking chair, her eyes fixed on the locket in Emma's hand. Your father wasn't the only one who lost someone that day. Emma felt a strange prickling at the back of her neck. Grandma? Ruth's gnarled fingers tightened around her walking stick. My older sister, Sarah, was Lillian's best friend. They were inseparable, spent every day together at school, every weekend exploring the woods. When the evacuation orders came, our family was one of the last to leave Silverton. Sarah was devastated about moving away, about being separated from Lillian. Sheriff Hayes leaned forward, his expression intent. I never knew that, Mrs. Walsh. Few did, Ruth continued. The day before we were set to leave, Sarah and Lillian made a pact. They decided to take something precious from Silverton and hide it somewhere safe, somewhere the rising waters couldn't reach. A time capsule of sorts, to preserve the spirit of the town they loved. Her voice grew softer, weighted with memory. Sarah took our mother's wedding ring. Lillian took that locket, a gift from her father for her 12th birthday. They rode out on Spirit that morning, promising to be back by noon. Emma felt a chill run through her, though the evening was warm. But Lillian never came back. Ruth nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Sarah returned alone, soaking wet and in hysterics. She told us there had been an accident. They'd gone to the old mine entrance in the hills above town, planning to leave their treasures in the cave. But there was a sudden rush of water, a pocket of groundwater released by the early dam construction. Lillian was swept away. Sarah tried to save her, but couldn't. She drew a shuddering breath. Spirit bolted. Sarah barely made it out alive. The old McElroy mine, Sheriff Hayes murmured. It connected to a whole network of tunnels under the valley. Some of them probably still exist above the waterline. Sarah was never the same after that day, Ruth continued. The guilt consumed her. She would sneak out at night to look for Lillian, convinced she might have survived somehow. Eventually, she left Willow Creek altogether, unable to bear the sight of the lake that had claimed her friend. She settled in Pittsburgh, married young, had a daughter, your mother, Emma. Emma's hands began to tremble, the locket suddenly, heavy in her palm. My mother, then that means Lillian Hayes was your great-aunt's best friend, Ruth confirmed. And the burden of that loss, that guilt, passed down through our family like a curse. Sarah drank herself to an early grave. Your mother tried to escape it by running as far as she could, but the darkness followed her too. She reached out, a trembling hand to touch Emma's hair. And then you came to me with the same look in your eyes that Sarah had, that haunted, searching look. And the white horse appeared again. Sheriff Hayes stood abruptly, pacing the length of the porch. But why would the horse show the locket to Emma now? And how did it end up in the lodge building when the girls were supposedly at the mine entrance? That's what I've been thinking about, Emma said quietly. I think Lillian might not have died that day. The adults stared at her in stunned silence. Think about it, Emma continued, the pieces fitting together in her mind as she spoke. The locket was found in the lodge, not near the mine. Ghost spirit has been watching over the lake for generations, but he saved me. He wanted me to find the locket. What if he's trying to tell us something? What if Lillian survived somehow, at least long enough to reach the lodge? Ruth's face had gone pale. The search parties never looked inside the buildings. They assumed everyone had evacuated, and they were focused on the areas near the mine where Sarah said the accident happened. And if she was injured, disoriented, Sheriff Hayes's voice trailed off, the implications too painful to articulate. She might have sought shelter in the most familiar building in town, Emma finished for him. The lodge where her father worked. She might have been there when the waters rose. A heavy silence fell over the porch as they each contemplated this possibility, that Lillian Hayes had not died in a sudden accident but had been trapped. alone, and possibly injured, as the valley slowly filled with water. "We need to know for sure," Sheriff Hayes said finally, determination replacing the shock in his expression. "David's survey equipment, his underwater mapping, we could conduct a proper search of the lodge ruins, find out if there's any evidence of what really happened." "I want to help," Emma said immediately. "Ghost trusts me. He's been trying to tell us this story for decades. I think he'll keep helping if I'm there." Ruth reached for Emma's hand, clasping it tightly in her own. "Your mother always said she felt like something was unfinished, like someone was waiting for her to come home. I thought it was just the depression talking, but maybe she was right." Over the next week, preparations were made for a proper exploration of the submerged Silverton Lodge. David Miller coordinated with underwater archaeology specialists from the State University. Sheriff Hayes obtained the necessary permits, citing historical preservation as the official reason for the survey. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the discovery of the Hayes locket, bringing the long-forgotten tragedy back into public consciousness. Throughout it all, Emma visited Silver Lake daily, sometimes accompanied by Miss Parker or David, sometimes alone, despite the continued warnings about supervision. Ghost appeared without fail, as if sensing the importance of what was unfolding. He allowed Emma to touch him now, to stroke his muscular neck and whisper her theories about Lillian's fate into his attentive ears. "We're going to find out what happened to her," she promised him one crisp afternoon as they stood at the lake's edge. "We're going to finish what you started." On the day of the expedition, Silver Lake was as still as glass, reflecting the clear blue October sky like a perfect mirror. A small crowd had gathered at the access point, mostly locals whose families had lived in the area for generations, many with connections to the original Silverton settlement. Pastor Williams had organized a brief prayer service before the dive team entered the water, acknowledging the solemn nature of what might be discovered. Emma stood between Grandma Ruth and Sheriff Hayes, the locket now cleaned and restored, hanging around her neck. Ghost had positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the lake, visible to all, his white coat luminous in the morning sunlight. "He's never shown himself to so many people before," Emma observed, nodding toward the horse. "He knows this is important," Sheriff Hayes replied. "He's stood watch long enough. Today, we all stand with him." The dive team consisted of David and two specialists from the university, equipped with advanced sonar mapping tools and underwater cameras that would transmit images to a monitor set up on shore. They entered the water methodically, following the coordinates that matched the old town maps with David's previous surveys. As they disappeared beneath the surface, an expectant hush fell over the gathered crowd. Emma found herself holding her breath, her hand clutching the locket so tightly that its edges dug into her palm. Beside her, Grandma Ruth leaned heavily on her walking stick, her lined face tense with anticipation. On the ridge, Ghost remained, motionless, a silent sentinel overseeing the proceedings. Minutes stretched into an hour as the divers methodically explored the submerged ruins of the lodge. The monitor on shore showed ghostly images of collapsed walls, waterlogged furniture and silt-covered floors, the preserved remains of a building that had stood proud until the waters claimed it. "They're approaching the east wing now," explained the technician monitoring the feed. "That would have been the administration offices according to the old plans." Sheriff Hayes nodded, his jaw tight. "My grandfather's office was in that section. Lillian would have known it well." The camera moved through a doorway, the image temporarily obscured by disturbed silt, then cleared to reveal what had once been an elegant office. A massive desk still stood against one wall, its surface draped with aquatic growth. Filing cabinets lay toppled nearby, their contents long since dissolved in the lake water. "Wait," the the technician said suddenly, adjusting something on his equipment. They found something in the corner office, the project manager's room. The camera swung around, focusing on a small adjoining space that had been partially protected by the collapse of a heavy bookcase across its entrance. As the silt settled, the outline of a small form became visible, huddled in the far corner of the room. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. After 70 years underwater, the scene was remarkably preserved. A child-sized skeleton, still, partially clothed in the remnants of what had once been a blue dress, curled in a position of final repose. Beside the remains lay a leather satchel, miraculously intact due to the anaerobic conditions of its burial under silt. On the ridge above, Ghost released a whinny that echoed across the water, a sound of such mournful recognition that several people, including Emma, found tears streaming down their faces without fully understanding why. "Lillian," Sheriff Hayes whispered, his voice breaking. She made it to her father's office. She was waiting for him to come back for her. The recovery operation was conducted with solemn respect. State authorities were notified, and proper protocols for the recovery of human remains were followed. The skeleton was carefully raised to the surface in a specially designed container, along with the leather satchel found beside it. As the remains of Lillian Hayes returned to the sunlight for the first time in 7 decades, Ghost descended from his ridge and approached the water's edge, moving with deliberate dignity through the parting crowd. He stood at the shoreline, head bowed, as the container was brought to land. The forensic examiner opened the satchel first, preserving its contents as evidence. Inside were several items: a small diary with waterlogged pages, a fountain pen, and a small box containing a woman's wedding ring, the treasured item Sarah Walsh had contributed to the girl's time capsule. "She kept her promise," Grandma Ruth said softly, tears flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. "She kept Sarah's treasure safe, even at the end." The diary, though damaged, yielded several pages that remained partially legible. The forensic team worked carefully to separate and preserve them, but it was Emma who was allowed to read the final entry aloud, a testament to her role in bringing Lillian's story to its conclusion. October 14th, 1954, Emma read, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "The water is coming faster now. I can hear it rushing outside. Spirit ran away when the tunnel collapsed. I hope he made it out. Sarah, too. I made it to Daddy's office. But no one is here. Everyone is gone. I'm scared, but I know Daddy will come back for me. He always does. I'll wait right here. I have our treasures safe in my bag. Sarah and I promised to protect them forever, and I will. I miss Spirit. I hope he finds someone to love him like I do. If anyone finds this, please tell my family I wasn't afraid at the end. I was brave, like Daddy always said I was." There wasn't a dry eye among the gathered crowd as Emma finished reading. Sheriff Hayes stood with his head bowed, one hand resting on the container that held his aunt's remains. Grandma Ruth leaned against Miss Parker, decades of family grief finding release at last. Ghost approached Emma slowly, his dark eyes fixed on the locket around her neck. With gentle movements, he pressed his muzzle against it, then raised his head to look directly into her eyes, a connection that transcended words, communicating across the years, a message of completion and release. "He can rest now," Emma said, softly, reaching up to stroke his velvet nose. They both can. In the days that followed, the story of Lillian Hayes and the white horse that had kept vigil over her resting place for 7 decades captured national attention. Journalists descended on Willow Creek, eager to document the extraordinary tale of devotion and discovery. Scientists debated the genetic improbability of a horse bloodline maintaining such specific behaviors and appearance across generations, while others pointed to documented cases of animals passing down complex learned behaviors through family groups. For the Hayes and Walsh families, however, the discovery brought something more precious than scientific interest or media attention. It brought closure and healing. Lillian was laid to rest properly in the Willow Creek Cemetery beside the graves of her parents and brother. The funeral service, conducted by Pastor Williams, was attended by the entire town and broadcast live on regional television. Emma stood between Sheriff Hayes and Grandma Ruth during the service, the three of them united by the shared history that had finally come to light. As Pastor Williams spoke about love that transcended time and tragedy, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her, not just for Lillian and Spirit, but for her own mother, for Grandma Ruth, and for herself. In bringing Lillian home, Pastor Williams said, Emma Walsh has helped heal a wound that has affected two families and an entire community for generations. It reminds us that no loss is ever final as long as we remember, as long as we honor those connections that bind us together across time. After the service, as people dispersed to the community hall for the reception, Emma slipped away to a quiet corner of the cemetery. Ghost was waiting there, as she somehow knew he would be, standing sentinel among the gravestones. "You can go now if you want to," she told him, stroking his neck. "You've done what you needed to do. Lillian is at peace." Ghost nickered softly, bumping his head against her shoulder in a gesture that had become familiar over the past months. Then, to Emma's surprise, he knelt on his front legs, lowering himself in a clear invitation. Heart racing, Emma carefully climbed onto his bare back, gripping his mane for balance. Ghost rose smoothly and began walking, not toward the lake, as she had expected, but toward Grandma Ruth's cabin on the hillside. As they approached, Emma saw Ruth sitting on the porch swing, watching their approach with a mixture of wonder and acceptance. For the first time since Emma had come to live with her, there was no shadow of pain or regret in her grandmother's eyes, only a clear recognition and something that looked very much like love. Ghost stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Emma slid from his back and stood beside him, one hand resting on his warm flank. "He's not leaving, is he?" Ruth asked, though it wasn't really a question. Emma shook her head. "I don't think so. Not completely. I think maybe he has a new purpose now." Ruth nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud of you, Emma. She always believed there was something special waiting for her family back in Willow Creek. She just never found the courage to come looking for it herself." "Do you think she knew about Lillian and Sarah, about what happened?" "Not consciously," Ruth replied. "But some knowledge runs deeper than memory. Some connections transcend ordinary understanding." She patted the swing beside her. "Come sit with me. There's more of our family history I'd like to share with you." As Emma climbed the steps to join her grandmother, Ghost moved to the edge of the yard, lowering himself onto the grass with the air of an animal settling in for a long stay. The evening sun gilded his white coat, transforming him into a creature of light against the darkening landscape. In the months that followed, Silver Lake underwent a transformation in the collective consciousness of Willow Creek. No longer a place of superstition and fear, it became a site of pilgrimage and remembrance. A memorial was erected at the lake access point, telling the story of Silverton, of Lillian Hayes, and of the white horse that had maintained its faithful vigil for 70 years. Emma's life changed too. Her relationship with Grandma Ruth deepened, as the older woman gradually opened up about their family history, sharing stories and photographs that had been packed away for decades. The community that had once viewed Emma as an outsider now embraced her as a local hero, and her classmates, who had previously ignored her, now sought her friendship with genuine interest. Ghost remained a constant presence, dividing his time between the lakeshore and the Walsh property. He never allowed anyone but Emma to ride him, but he accepted carrots and apples from Grandma Ruth's hand and tolerated the respectful attention of visitors who came to see the guardian of Silver Lake. On a spring afternoon, as wildflowers bloomed along the lakeshore and new leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, Emma sat beside Sheriff Hayes on the flat rock where she had first encountered Ghost. The locket, now permanently hers by the sheriff's insistence, caught the sunlight as it hung around her neck. "The university researchers want to interview you again," Hayes mentioned, skipping a stone across the calm surface of the lake. "Something about documenting the psychosocial aspects of the discovery." Emma shrugged, watching Ghost graze nearby. "I've told them everything I know." Hayes nodded, understanding her reticence. Some things aren't meant to be analyzed and categorized. Some things just are. He glanced at her sideways. "Your grandmother tells me you're thinking of becoming a veterinarian." "Maybe," Emma admitted. "Or a wildlife conservationist, something where I can work with animals." She touched the locket absently. "Ghost taught me that they understand, more than we give them credit for. That they can care in ways that are different from humans, but just as deep." "Lillian would have liked that," Hayes said with a smile. "According to my father, she was always bringing home injured birds and rabbits, trying to nurse them back to health." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the play of light on water. Eventually, Hayes spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You know, when I first became sheriff here, I thought my purpose was to protect this town from its past, from the shadows and secrets of Silver Lake. Now I understand it differently." He gestured toward the memorial visible in the distance. "Sometimes protection isn't about keeping painful truths hidden. Sometimes it's about bringing them to light so healing can begin." Emma nodded, thinking of her own mother, of the inherited grief that had haunted her without her ever understanding its source. "Do you think she knows somehow, Lillian, I mean, that we found her, that we understand what happened?" Hayes considered this, his weathered face softening. "I believe that love leaves an imprint that never truly fades. Whether you call it a soul, a spirit, or just a memory, yes, I think she knows." Ghost approached, nudging Emma's shoulder, in his familiar gesture of affection. She rose, stroking his neck, and in one fluid movement swung onto his back. The horse turned toward the trail that wound around the lake, eager for their daily ride. "We'll be back before dark," Emma promised, gathering Ghost's mane in her hands. Hayes nodded, watching as they set off at an easy trot, the white horse and the girl moving as one along the shore of Silver Lake, no longer a place of tragedy and loss, but a testament to devotion that had transcended time, to truth that had finally emerged from the depths, and to a community that had rediscovered its heart in the courage of a child and the unwavering loyalty of her extraordinary guardian. As Ghost carried her along the familiar path, Emma felt the weight of the locket against her skin and smiled, understanding at last that some bonds never break, that some guardians never abandon their watch, and that even the deepest waters cannot drown a love that refuses to be forgotten. In Willow Creek, they would tell this story for generations to come, the tale of a white horse, a lost girl, and the child who helped bring them both home at last.